Hello everyone, today we're going to be talking about Eric Clapton. Okay, hope everybody is well and in good health. That is good. Right, okay, so we're going to start with Eric Clapton. Why is he still the best? Now, when I say he's the best at what he does. You know, I think if you copy a player and just one player, if you just listen to one player and he's your kind of go-to guy, he's your Bible, then you're going to be a very one-dimensional musician. So when, you know, Eric Clapton is the best at what he does, and what we're going to find out what he does today. But I sometimes get a mediocre jazz guitar player say to me, "Oh, I don't like Clapton, he's boring, he just plays that one style." But what this mediocre jazz guitarist doesn't realise is, you know, Eric Clapton bends a string better than anybody in the whole world. And this mediocre jazz guitarist probably can't bend a string to save his life. So that's, you know, you've got to identify what it is that Eric Clapton is great and what you're going to listen to him for. Because, you know, you might be playing jazz one day, but, you know, you might be on a function gig, on a wedding gig or something, and you've got to bend a string. And you can listen to Eric Clapton and learn how to bend a string. So that's what we're going to kind of get into today. Now, I love, the reason I'm playing an SG is because that was kind of my favourite era when he was doing the first song that I played, Outside Women Blues. And then he went on to Blind Faith. That kind of stuff. Really just kind of beautiful riffs. You know, he kind of took the kind of clean sound of B.B. King. And also the slightly more distorted sound of Freddie King. But those kind of blues guitar players back in the 50s in Chicago, they were not playing full-on sort of sustain. It was kind of more on the edge, you know, and B.B. King would find that sweet spot where it's just about to break up on his Fender Twin, and Freddie King was the same, you know, but obviously Freddie King had those P90s and that gold top, and it gave that whereas I guess in Cream it was slightly heavier. And you had that long sustain, which is what really Eric Clapton became known for. So he kind of set a standard. It wasn't like, you know, because in England at the time, and a lot of those beat groups, you know, bands were playing these Watkins Rapier, I think amps or guitars, whatever. And it was sounding really shitty, you know, really awful sound, and the bending was out of tune. Everybody was bending out of tune. And Clapton came along and said, no, you've got to bend in tune, and you've got to add vibrato, and you've got to have, you know, sustain. So he had this kind of, it was like the perfect storm. He had a beautiful Les Paul, he had the Marshall, which had just been sort of, you know, based off a Bassman, but had just been made by Jim Marshall. And, you know, and you had this great player that could bend in tune. And the three things came together. And that was the standard, you know. And so then you had players like Peter Green, which, Peter Green was influenced by Hank Marvin, but when he heard Eric Clapton play with John Mayall, he knew that, you know, the bending has to be in tune, and it has to have vibrato, and it has to be as good as the guys in Chicago, you know. We maybe never be as good as the guys in Chicago, but you know what I mean. So that's what kind of Eric Clapton brought to the table, was this great facility to bend a string and play in tune, you know. And, you know, guys like Dave Gilmour as well. It kind of became almost a British thing of this slightly more overdriven sound, you know, rather than the sort of Chicago blues, which obviously you can't replicate, you know. You can replicate it, but it's never going to be as good as a Chicago sound if you're not born and bred in Chicago, you know. So that's why we have the British sound, because it was played by English, British guitar players from Britain, who'd never been to Chicago. So how are we going to sound like we're from Chicago if we've never been there? We're just listening to records. So that's why you've got that great sort of sound, that overdrive. Then of course he went, after Blind Faith, he struck out on his own and he did 461 Ocean Boulevard. And this is kind of where he was with an American band, and he was getting into that sort of kind of soft rock, bit of country and sort of southern music. And yeah, it probably wasn't his, in some respects it wasn't his finest album, but I love that album. It's a great album, and I think it's a great transitional period from him to get from what was going out of fashion. This is before, just as David Bowie was coming onto the scene with Ziggy Stardust, and or maybe he'd been and gone, I don't know the chronology. But suffice to say, Eric Clapton covered Bob Marley's I Shot the Sheriff. Now if you listen to Bob Marley's version, it's a real tight, incredible rhythm, which, again, you can only do this rhythm if you're from Jamaica. Otherwise you're going to do the UB40 version. I love UB40, but it's not Jamaican reggae. I'm not saying I can do this, guys, but if you listen to Bob Marley's guitar players, they had two fantastic guitar players. It's a real tight rhythm. And you can hardly hear the third. Sometimes you can't hear that major or minor third, so you don't know if the chord's minor or major. It's very, very percussive. And they're generally only hitting three strings at the same time. Whereas if you listen to the 461 Ocean Boulevard version of I Shot the Sheriff, it's much more kind of the full chord. Like they're strumming, rather than the real tight. I'm from Essex in England, so I'm not saying I could play reggae. But so, Eric Clapton released this song in 1974. I think Bob Marley and the Wailers released it in 1973. Now, you could, on one side of the coin, you could say that's terrible. Trying to steal, this new reggae sound and then putting it out as your own. And I don't think that's what Eric Clapton was doing. I think in his mind, he was just making a solo album and he loved the song and he wanted to cover it. And he was very worried. And in fact, I think he wrote in his autobiography or whatever, he said he phoned up Bob Marley and asked what the lyrics were about. Because he wanted to, try and put that into the feeling into the song. And apparently Bob Marley, he couldn't understand Bob Marley, what he was saying about the song. And then afterwards, I think Bob Marley sort of said, actually, it's an okay version. So, Bob Marley actually liked Clapton's version. But funnily, that song became a hit in America. And even in Jamaica, the two main radios were playing Eric Clapton's version of I Shot the Sheriff. And Bob Marley wasn't happy about it because he just released a single and it wasn't getting played. And they were playing the Eric Clapton version of his song. But Chris Blackwell from Island Records would have signed the publishing, and I'm sure Bob Marley would have made quite a bit of money from the publishing. He would have done very well out of that, Eric Clapton covering the song, because Eric Clapton wouldn't have made any publishing money because it's Bob Marley's song. So Bob Marley would have made a lot of money off of Eric Clapton covering that. So you could say that on one side it was great for Bob Marley because it gave him extra exposure to American fans, and it kind of unlocked a lot of audiences for Bob Marley. Although other people would say, oh, it's he's stealing a style of music. But again, I don't want to get involved in the politics. But I think Clapton was good to kind of take a risk and try new things. Even if he sometimes didn't pull them off, but he'd always be looking for things to add to his music. And although the blues was his basis, and then we get to the 1980s, and he's wearing the Armani suits, quite famous. He's got a new Stratocaster, But even then, he's invented a new sound. He's kind of taken his this kind of style. Really bending. He plays a lot up above the 12th fret and really holding those bends. Which sounds fantastic. If you're playing in a big concert and you got that kind of Steve Gadd, whatever, playing drums, and Nathan East, and those bands, beautiful playing. And he obviously had the Strat and he had the boost, the preamp boost in there to replicate the sound that he had in the Blues Breakers, really, essentially. That kind of singing sustain that he was known for, that was what he had in his Strat. That's the reason why he had that treble boost, which is kind of like a really an interesting thing to put in a Stratocaster, Because, of course, he went to the Strat after Hendrix died, and again, he's always reinvented himself, but he's got that long, sustained bending technique, So I think really that there was an album called August, which is quite interesting we talk about, because sorry this video today is a bit rambling, but I was actually down with the flu for 3 weeks. I've only just come back to the land of the living. So he released an album called August, where he's got his Armani suit on and he's got the Strat. And if we fast forward to today, a guy, John Mayer, I've seen that I haven't listened to the album, I haven't listened because I don't really know his music well, but I was interesting that he's kind of the sort of a guitarist of fame at the moment, and he's kind of copied that album, I think I heard one song, a clip of one song, and I wasn't too impressed by it, but what was interesting was that somebody's taken one album of Eric Clapton and tried to replicate it, and the fashion and the vibe, and it's kind of a testament to Eric Clapton of, when most people were in new wave and punk and they were playing keyboards, he still brought the guitar. He brought the guitar into the 80s, and he's always flown the flag for the guitar, for guitarists, the solid body, rock guitar or blues rock, whatever you want to call it. But that album August it's a great album, because Phil Collins, I think, produced it, but it's still got his sound, he's developed his sound, there is a progression, and then even I guess then he released Through the Cradle or whatever, In the Cradle. I wasn't a big fan of that, actually. I didn't really like that album. It was kind of a blues album, but for me, had Dave Bronze, a great bass player, but Steve Gadd, he's too good, man. If you want to do a blues album, don't get the best drummer in the world playing drums. You want to get somebody like a drummer at Muddy Waters band. That kind of somebody from Chicago. Go to Chicago, get a band from there. Then you're going to sound like a Chicago band. You're not going to sound like a real blues band with Steve Gadd. He's the best drummer in the world. You're going to sound like a Millionaire's version of the blues. So that said, and his guitar tone, it was okay. He was playing a Gibson 335. It was okay, But here he is today, and he's playing Dumble modded Fender amps. He's kept his finger on the pulse. He knows what's cool. He knows Dumble is cool. He knows that Dumble is the best at making your amp sound incredible. So he's got Dumble on his amps. So he's not he's not kind of devoid of what's going on in the guitar world. He knows what's going on, and he's still playing, he's still gigging, he's getting on in life, and he's a bit frail, but he's still doing it, man. He's still playing, and he's giving it 100%. And he's about the music, he's about the guitar playing, and he's bringing the guitar into the next decade, still influencing younger players, So that's why I want to say, really the conclusion of this video is if you want to take anything from Clapton, take his bending, take the beautiful bend where you can make the guitar, if we get that, what's called the Clapton tone from. That is what Clapton brought to the guitar world. Eddie Van Halen, you might say, well, Eddie Van Halen's done a lot more. Well, Eddie Van Halen learned to play guitar listening to John Mayall's Blues Breakers album with Eric Clapton, okay? So there you go. you know. So that's why he's still the best at what he does. He's still the best. You know, there's no one's come along. People are still copying him. You know, the John Mayers and God knows and Joe Bonamassas are still copying him. They're still copying a facet of his. You know, John Mayer's copying the '80s era, and Joe Bonamassas copying his '60s career. You know, so there's people just latching onto a little bit of his career and making a career out of that themselves. That's how good he is. So Clapton's always been his own man, and he's always. We're talking musically here. We're talking musically. You can always listen to Clapton. You can always learn something. You can always learn how to bend. He's got a great sense of rhythm as well. You know, you're not going to learn if you want to play, you know, octaves. You know, listen to Wes Montgomery. If you want to play tapping, listen to Eddie Van Halen. You know, Clapton's going to give you one thing only, and that is bending a note in tune with vibrato and making it sound beautiful. That's the only thing he's good at, and he's a master at that, and he's better than anyone else in the world at doing that. This is the Goose signing out. God bless. Stay healthy. Take care.